Hello. So I'm Tina Jordan. I'm the Vice President of Membership at FCA International, and I want to thank you all for being here. Our watches say 11:15, so we're going to start right on time, and as people hear my voice, they'll start migrating in. But we certainly want to respect your time. We know that you have choices to make during this week, and we appreciate you being here to hear this session. I'd like to welcome you to the Engagement Theater session on network, security threats, and issues. This session is presented by St. Leo's University, which is one of FCA's preferred providers for education programs. In today's session, you will learn about the common types of threats encountered by organizations, being malware, application vulnerabilities, and system port and vulnerability scanning. This session has been approved for continuing education by CompTIA. In order to get those continuing education units, the session needs to be 1 hour. CompTIA, we work very closely with them to have our session certified, and we need to play by their rules, and they say it has to be 1 hour. So I know Dr. Adams has scheduled some time at the end for questions, and if we're not going to make it quite to 1 hour, I suggest that you come up with some questions if you're wanting to get the continuing education. We will have a volunteer in the back with a scanner at the end. So just look for the person who has a scanner. I think at the end, Dr. Adams will remind you to have that person kind of wave their hand, and you can go back and get your badge scanned for the continuing education units. Just wanted to add, you have to be a member of FCA to get the documentation. So if you're not a member of FCA and you do want the continuing education documentation, you'll want to go over to the FCA booth over here in the corner, sign up. Membership is $50, and you get a 10% discount if you sign up today. And then you get your professional, your certificate, continuing education documentation provided by FCA. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Joshua Adams, Instructor of Computer Sciences and Information Systems at St. Leo's University. Mr. Adams received his MBA in Information Security Management from St. Leo's University and a Master's in Science from Walden University. He is a doctoral candidate focusing on the interoperability of e-health systems. Mr. Adams also organizes the Open Agriculture program via MIT Labs at St. Leo's University. And prior to St. Leo's, Joshua served for 20 years in the United States Coast Guard. And I understand he'll finish with his doctoral defending that in by December, and then he will be Dr. Adams. But right now, please join me in a warm FCA welcome for Joshua Adams.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Hi, hello. Good morning. How's everyone? Good. Yeah, it is a bit chilly. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So, as mentioned, yeah, I spent 20 years in Coast Guard. So we have some military here, right? Any reserves? Yeah? Yeah. I remember those days. It was a couple of years ago, but I still remember. So what I'd like to try and briefly start out with is that St. Leo, we are a national center for academic excellence as designated by the NSA, which is one of the new things this year. And we're accredited up until 2021, I believe. And then the other thing is that we recently received a NSF grant for about 600,000, right? So we have 8 students that are all going to obtain about $10,000 per year as far as the scholarship goes for cyber. We have a very robust cyber program, and it's ever expanding every year. Oh yeah, let's see. Okay. So a little bit about me, right? For the most part, I'm a lifelong learner. For those in the military, you guys are really aware of having the need to consistently learn, right? I know for most of you guys, you're jack of many trades, right? But master of none, right? I was a corpsman for 20 years, and I switched over to academia probably about 8 years ago. I started switching over as I was winding down my career. A lot of personal interest in security, a lot of personal interest in computers, and it just kind of started coming natural to me. So the degrees that we have at St. Leo, we have an Associate's in Arts in Cybersecurity this year. We have both a bachelor's and a master's that started a couple of years ago. The bachelor's or the master's is fully online. This gives you a kind of a brief overview of the courses of what we teach in those particular programs for the bachelor's. And then our master's, you can see these are some basic courses that we review that the master's program will go through. So our cyber lab looks pretty much like this. We have 4 individual LAN networks for students to be able to actually practice pen testing, right? So we want to give them some kind of real-world experience. So this kind of allows us that opportunity to give them that experience in a more physical setting. And of course, for those that are aware of the acronyms here, right? Here's our servers, and of course, just, we have some sit rep issues, right? You guys see it? One of the things that we really try to do at St. Leo is, especially for online courses, is show our provide virtual cyber labs. We have a couple different types of virtual labs that we work with. As an example, this is one. Because one of the big things that everybody's aware of is hands-on experience, right? If you don't have the hands-on experience, it kind of does no good. For a lot of you guys in the military, you're doing things daily, right? Theory is important, but not as important as application. So what we're going to talk about today is some key concepts in security. Look at security today from the aspect of where we're at. We have big concerns is when we're talking about security, what is it that we need to protect, right? What is it that we have to secure, right? We tend to kind of lose sight of what's important to us, right? And then we have to identify who we're protecting this from, correct? That's one of the big things that we tend to forget from time to time. And then, of course, looking at risk assessment, right? And looking at the risk to our network infrastructure. We have to start remembering to look at things from our wired, wireless infrastructure, right? Those threats and risk and vulnerabilities to all aspects of the infrastructure, right? A lot of us are dealing with phones, right? Phones more and more every day, especially BYOD, stuff like that. Everybody goes into those command and control centers, right? You have to take, at least in my experience in the past was, you had to leave it outside, right? But everybody does it, right? One of the other things that we have to start remembering and looking at, right, is all the tools, all the new hacking tools, right? Especially with the release of those NSA hacking tools and stuff like that. We have to be aware of those, right? Those are really important, especially on the good side. Those like to consider themselves as a good side. We need to identify and understand what those particular tools are and how they're used to exploit systems, right? And then, of course, we have social engineering. Social engineering is probably one of the more effective ways of getting information, right? We'll talk a little more about that later as well, and we'll show you a nice little video. So, as you can remember, we have the WannaCry, right? More recently, right? You guys remember the WannaCry here, right? And by the way, please feel free to ask any questions at any time. Just kind of shout it out and say, hey, I have something to say or add, or I have a question. But we have the WannaCry, and you have here right? One of the leading professors that actually kind of was involved with some other aspects to WannaCry was recently arrested, right? He was picked up in, I think it was Las Vegas, Nevada. I don't know much of the details. I didn't get a chance to read into it too much. But the idea here is that we have these new risks, exploitations that we have to be concerned about. And of course, who's a Game of Thrones fans? Come on, everybody's a Game of Thrones fans. Come on. Yeah, so here we go. You guys know that this was recently hacked and released over the last couple of days, right? You know, for some of us that don't want to know what the future episode shows, here it is, released for us, right? So this was probably something we should have protected a little better. I don't know, but it's interesting to see how things are going to only get worse, right? And then of course we have other things like IoT devices, right? We have IoT devices everywhere now, right? There's cities that are just adding these devices, right? They're adding them everywhere. I think I was recently told San Antonio is adding devices at the tune of $5 million a year, budget-wise, to outfit, right? So you know you have your phones that are connected to your thermostats, and your thermostats are connected to your washers and everything else now, right? And so and we have medical devices connected to everything, right? So IoT is definitely going to be a big concern and issue, right? We have, according to top 10 security startup threats, right? They have 8.4 billion connected devices in use worldwide, 8.4 billion, right, for IoT. And that's only expected to grow, right? So again, the potential security threats are just exponential. There's an analysis done in 2012 called By the Numbers, right, where they talked about the average cost of containing a cyber threat. $415,000. Somebody ask a question? Oh, sorry. $415,000 for minimum to defend, to contain. Right? I don't have the current numbers, but just we can imagine that this is not going to get cheaper. Right? So what's the point? Why are they doing this? Right? We have some that do it for the thrill. Unfortunately, I tried to get some old Coast Guard images, but I couldn't get my buddies to send any. I guess they didn't want to be up here. But the whole thrill, like being out on a 41-footer or something like that. Riding some waves, right? Doing some law enforcement or something like that. We do it for a hobby, right? Some of them probably do it for challenge. Maybe a few do it for status, Maybe some groups like Anonymous or something like that, which is kind of ironic, right? They call themselves Anonymous. And then you have money, right? And of course that's increasing. Right, that's becoming the more carrot to the stick. Right, everybody's wanting to try and make an easy buck somewhere. All right, and of course we look at it. What they do is try to attack things from easy assets. Right, the low-hanging fruit. Right, we're familiar with that term, lowest hanging fruit. We're always trying to go for the easiest target first. I'll give you a good example. One of the things I mentioned in my courses, in my intro courses, is there was last year an older lady. I don't recall her age, but the story was based off of how somebody had actually social engineered her. They were able to get into her system, and then they ransomed. She downloaded some ransomware, and it locked her system, locked her out of her system. Right? She ended up having to pay close to $5,000, $2,500 to $5,000 in bitcoins to get her system back. Right? And she wasn't a tech person, right? She didn't know how to do it. She didn't know how to get her information back, other than just paying for it, because to her, everything was in that computer, right? Her images, her pictures, you know, her whole life, right? So to her, that was her value, right? That's what was important to her, right? But of course, these guys, they do it for a monetary gain, right? So, you know, so what they'll do is they'll start out with somebody like her. Then eventually they'll move on further, right? We know recently in California last year, right, the hospital that was attacked ended up having to pay $20,000 to get back some records, right? It just shows how where they can go, you know, easy first is always going to be ideal. And then, of course, there's organizations that are in there for a while, right? We have the OPM hacked, I believe it was, right? Where they controlled networks, they were in there for a while, just kind of sitting dormant, collecting information and data, right? And then of course, we have those that are unique targets that provide some type of a challenge. So when we start thinking of security, and when we think about industry or military, right, we have to remember what is it that we're protecting, right? What is it that we're looking at, right? And we can classify those as 7 domains, right? We have the user domain. We have workstation. We have LAN, WAN domains, remotes, right? So these are the things that we have to start kind of looking at and remembering what we're, what's part of our infrastructure, right? What's necessary for protection, right? Let's see. Does that work? No. I don't think that's working. There it is. I don't know if you can see very well, but we have the remote access that's connected to LAN, WAN. Then we have our WAN, and then again the workstation that we have to look at. So we look at each domain, and we look at the threats and vulnerabilities specific to those domains, right? Some of them there's overlap. Some of them are more specific that we have to kind of remember, right? And we have to look at what it is that will impact or how they get the information for those particular domains. Like when we're talking about user, we're talking about social engineering, right? We're talking about phishing, right? I know a lot of us love to go fishing, right? But of course, that's not what we're talking about here, right? And then, of course, the classic Trojans, right? One of the things I like to do in classes, we have a virtual lab set up, and one of the fun things my students like to do is when they actually get to hide a Trojan as a minesweeper. You guys remember what minesweeper is? Right? So I'm kind of dating myself there, but I know I look young, but I'm not that young. So, but that's one of the fun things I get feedback on, you know, that they actually get a chance to experience some hands-on, you know, Trojan, working with a Trojan, all right? That's kind of hard for me to see. I thought that looked a little bit better, but talking about how there was a prediction of close to $5 billion in risk this upcoming year. So, take a quick look at social engineering.
So I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas for DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year. They're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
Do you want to do a sample phishing call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice solicitation, and basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider and
Okay.
see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
I'm going to spoof from your number, so it's going to look like it's calling from
Has
you.
anybody seen
Okay.
this yet?
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. my husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry. I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30
At
seconds,
gmail.com.
Jessica gets access to my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account.
Jess uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry, so there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my password.
Thank you so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right, thank you.
Holy shit. So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yeah.
So, is that not interesting? Is that not something? Come on now. I show this to my class. My class is completely floored when they see this, right? Most of them didn't even know that this would happen, right? But this is stuff that happens daily, right? It's this is what we have to start thinking about, right? We have to start remembering because a lot of us get so, I dare say, complacent, right? We get so used to doing things and we don't think about things, right? And next thing you know, we're not thinking about what needs to be secured, right? Or the entire system, right? And so when we're talking about like a user domain, this is what happens with our users, right? For those that are management level or senior level or something like that, we have to remember that those at potential different levels in the organization are really subject to some kind of social engineering, right? So we have to start thinking more about what needs to be protected in each of those levels, right? So we have the user domain, right, which is typically one of the lower levels, one of the more easier levels for a lot of people to get into because it's one of the harder to protect because we're our own worst enemy sometimes, right? We give up so much information, or sometimes we're willing to give up so much information. How many have Facebook accounts? Right. So that's the other thing, right? Just think about how much information you're giving up, especially if you're a user, how much information you're giving up to Facebook on a daily basis, and how much somebody could get information from you, right? And we have all of our workstations. We have our workstations at work, at home, right? We use those. Well, you're going to use those to remote into, right? We do all of our work on those, right? And so they're kind of a hybrid system, and we're working with our work that could contain some kind of sensitive information for that particular organization, right? I know when I was active duty and managing the reserves, I was always taking work home, right? I was razzing in, right? I was taking care of hotel rooms for the reserves or other information, dealing with their training or medical needs, right? But if I wasn't aware of what my home workstation was, then it'd become a big security issue, right? And of course, we have other devices connected to those, right? We're all using our smartphones now for a lot of work, right? For a lot of workstation work, we're using those in replace of some computers. Some people, that's all they're doing, right? Is just using some type of a smartphone, right? Here's a good point. So what if we don't change at all and something just magically happens? Right? We just don't think about things, right? We don't think about the security. We don't think about the, who's monitoring our system, who's using our systems or anything like that. And we just kind of hope it goes away, right? Or what about this? Right? And this is unfortunately the biggest size, but here, what we have here, right, is we have where a couple guys, right, are perfectly fine using square wheels. They're not interested in changing, right? They think what they're doing now, perfectly good. They're perfectly safe, perfectly secure, not thinking about any other domains, not thinking about any other issues or concerns. But somebody comes along and says, hey, we have some round wheels, right? So these are the types of things we have to start kind of applying to our thinking for security, right? Especially from a cyber perspective. So what do you think this says about you or us? Right? When we're not willing to make any type of a change, when we're so complacent, where we're so comfortable with what we're doing, or we're so sure of our security and ourselves, right? One of the first things I tell my students is that don't think you're secure just because you know something about it. And we have to remember, especially those in the security side, how many of you actually do any kind of security at home on your off time? See, very, very few. Very few. It's like, anybody networking or anything like that. If I were to go to your house, you probably wouldn't have a network set up, right? You left all that at work, right? Because you just, I'm okay. Right? So, and like I was mentioning, we have all of our resources via remote access, right? We use CAC readers, right? We RAS in. We go through wireless or any kind of standard broadband connection. All right. So this is a reference to those that have prior military or reserve, right? How many of you guys have those? I had like 5 of them at one point. So I know if I had at least 5 of them, you guys have at least a couple, right? Yeah, come on. They'd break a lot of time too. But some of us would actually, and I know, so my lieutenant in past would actually have a couple just at different workstations he would work at, different places. And that, again, that just tells how much work we do elsewhere and where our thinking needs to be and where we have to kind of start thinking about security, right? So we have to think of why are these vulnerabilities? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here we go. I know it's kind of hard to, again, read this, but what happened here is, right, he just went and had a hemorrhoid removed, but at the same time, his boss comes back and says, oh, put a data port in, right? Because we're all so used to working. We all need, well, always having to work remotely, do different types of additional things, right? Because I remember getting those phone calls 9, 10 o'clock at night from the reserve. Hey, I didn't plan on drilling this weekend, but I need a room. Or, oh, hey, by the way, we're heading out on a little deployment for, for the weekend. Can you make sure our medical records are up to date? Right? So then we have to look at our WAN domain, right? Which we pay attention to our routers, our switches, right? All the firewalls that we have established, if we do. Hopefully we're using a little more than just Windows firewall, right? Especially in more sensitive type of systems. Oh, come on. We all like to try and access the promotion list, right? We all have our buddies that we call, the rating force master chief or somebody like that. Hey, what's the next advancement list? What's the next promotion list, right? Nobody did that? That can't be just a Coast Guard thing. So this is one of the things that I kind of dealt with in the Coast Guard. This was called with Readiness training database. And this is just typical kind of information I got off even just online itself. Right? But these are the types of things, because we would access these things from home, we had to be aware of what security need was, right? What the type of ports they're accessing, right? So when you're talking about network infrastructure, right, you had to have that communication. You need to know what ports you can allow open, which ones have to be closed, right? You're always having to consistently monitor those, right? You don't want to have every port just open where anybody can get into, right? So when we're dealing with any kind of applications, such as MRTT or any other type of Army applications or anything like that that everybody remotely access, you want to make sure that you have your ports only accessible that need to be accessible, right? Hopefully nobody keeps all their ports on, right? So how do we compromise our systems? Let's see. You guys remember this guy? Right? So do we have mistakes that are made with ports or other things or security? Or do we just have happy accidents? Come on. Man, it's a hard crowd. Okay. So I think most of us like to think that we don't make mistakes. I think a lot of us like to think that we just have those happy accidents. But when you're in front of your superior, right, or your supervisor, the tune kind of changes a little, right? So, and how we're accessing these systems, right? We're doing it by Trojan, right? We're doing it by some kind of a virus, adware, malware of all types, right? We have our spyware. We have our keyloggers, worms, right? Any kind of backdoor that was left open by the application itself, right? Or any others. So who remembers these days where it's a simple, obnoxious virus and it didn't cause damage? Anybody? Right? That's all it did. We weren't so concerned about security, right? But of course, that's not the same today, right? viruses are so much more complex, right? So much more, I dare say, hybrid in nature, right? So much more dangerous, right? You know, and we have viruses that can shut down electric grids, right? You know, we have a virus that can shut down somebody's pacemaker, Jeeps, cars, right? Because of application issues. So this I captured just a couple days ago from McAfee. Was recent threats, recent virus threats. So again, I apologize. I thought this looked a little better, but we have our virus types as of, let's see, what was it? These are the low risk as of just a couple days ago. And these were Trojans. Right? And speaking of Trojans, our things are always as they seem. Right? Now that's what I call a virus. Here we go. We have tech support guy's already sitting in his chair, right? And already pretending to be someone he's not. So what's some other type of things we need to contend with? Spyware, right? We have our lonely dog in there spying on the cats, providing some, additional information there, right? Of course, we have our keyloggers, right? Capturing all the information. Some of us may use it on significant others to see if anybody else is doing something they shouldn't be doing, right? I don't know. But, we have these little potential, all these little devices out there. Start capturing all this information now. Now we have to start thinking again, does somebody have this at home, right? We start thinking about the workstations, again, remote access. What's going on here, right? And this is why we have to kind of start connecting all of these. Again, I referred to the Jeep issue, right? How they're consistently able to access this in a matter of seconds, right? Shut down the whole car, right? You guys remember reading about this, seeing videos on this? Something, right? So as any type of organization, these are the things that we have to start thinking about and how they impact our systems, right? Especially when we're talking about how our connected system over here for our Jeep is connected with the other aspects of the network. So here we have what's happening today. Right? This was a global virus map that I pulled up of where most activity was just as a couple days ago. Right? And then we have another view where we're talking about, right, so here's the virus activity, and then this was, if I remember correctly, it was attacks, top 5 attacks within the U.S. and the areas. So we're going to see if I can pull up the fire and the Norse Corp here. Right, so here's your real-time threats, what's going on, right? This is what we have to contend with on a regular basis. Yeah. So here we have, right, the threat map, what's going on, active threats, active attacks. I don't notice up here, it's kind of hard to see, but they're talking about right here, new attack from Thailand, new attack from Netherlands to the U.S., right? A lot of these kind of organizations, I'm sure you guys are familiar with seeing these types of captures, right? But these kinds of things just hopefully start putting things in perspective of remembering the domains again, right? We remember what's the first thing that the attackers are going to try and go for, right? Remember the low-hanging fruit, right? The user. Right? The easy target, right? And this is where we're going to try and go first. I think we're okay with there. Let's see if this one loads up here. Anybody seen the one from Norse here? It's kind of neat. You know, these are kind of the things that we like to show our students, right? So they get a kind of perspective that these things are happening on a regular basis and that you have to really start thinking about the whole picture, right? Rather than just one little aspect. You gotta love technology. Well, if we can get it to come up here, right? You'll see that it tells you the attack origins, the types, right? Targets. You know, and one of the things that we stress to our students is that no matter what type of field you're in or going into, these are the types of things that you need to be aware of, and at least you need to understand what's going on. I don't think that's going to load up, so. I think they're just probably being DDoSed or something. Yeah, we'll just move on. Okay. So, threats today, right? We have our APTs, our advanced persistent threats, right? Our highly targeted threats, right? The elections, regardless of what your thoughts are or your feelings, right? We have to at least understand that this is where you know some cyber is going, right? Cyber threats is that we have you know people that are just wanting to get into any aspect that they can, where they can alter or influence certain things, right? And then they look at gleaning any type of information that they can, right? From phishing, social engineering, right? Remember what happened that video there, right? She was able in 30 seconds, have access to his account. So you can imagine what type of information others can get on a regular basis just by, simple social engineering of looking at your Facebook, right? Capturing information that you tweet out, right? All that everybody loves to put out there on a regular basis, and they just don't remember that it can be used in many different ways. So, and we have one of the biggest issues right now, aside from healthcare, is financial industry, right? Had over 1 billion breaches since 2016. Over 1 billion data breaches, records, right? Does anybody know what the current loss is? The current record loss? Over 9 billion. 9 billion records. Right? And again, this because we have to really start thinking in these realm of domains, right? We have to start thinking of who's using what, what's connecting what, what's accessing what. I'll say it again. Most of us don't go home, especially with technology, technology background. We don't go home and set up our networks properly. We don't go home and do extra work because we're already tired and not interested from earlier in the day, right? So we just slap whatever together, routers, switches, whatever else we may want to do, and we do standard security, right? And we have standard passwords still, right? We just don't think about two factors, or we don't think about any kind of. We don't think about any other issues. Right? Then we end up losing over 9 billion records, just since 2013. So we need to start evaluating a little better, right? We talk about risk. I remember from my Coast Guard days, we used a GAR model. Is anybody familiar with that? Yeah, something similar, right? Green, amber, red, Whenever we deploy out, right? Whenever we go out for tow evolution or something like that, we would check the box on everything, right? But we do these kinds of things on a daily basis, right? We just kind of do it unconsciously sometimes. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we have to start thinking about these things more regularly, right? Make it more conscious thinking, right? Because if we don't, we're going to be part of that 9 billion data records loss, right? And we're just going to keep adding to it, right? Question here is how often do you evaluate risks for a young family member to drive a car, go on a trip, right? I mean, you think about those things, right? But do we really think about them? Right? So in this case, we use some type of a matrix. In this case, we have a matrix that we use in one of the classes, the likelihood, low, medium, high impact, how critical it is, how likely the risk is, and how much of an impact, right? I'm not saying that we have to adopt this personally, something like this, but if you have something that you can compare it to, I think that kind of helps put us in that right direction, especially it's securing. So I guess we got a couple minutes here to kind of sum some of this up, right? We need to definitely identify what's valuable, what's important to us. What do we need to protect, right? We need to identify from whom, we're protecting this information from, right? This is all part of that layers of security or risk mitigation, right? When we're talking about our domains and our networks, we have to identify the risk assessment to the network infrastructure. So even at home, we should start looking at things, right? Who's using our systems, right? What are our kids doing? Are they downloading Minecraft? And then are they downloading mod to their Minecraft, right? Because when we're talking about mods, that's when you have some of those other API issues, right? Those other scripts from script kiddies or anybody else that's doing all these other kinds of things to these mods, right? And then, of course, those are getting onto your computer. You share a computer with a family member. You have a 6-year-old. Next thing you know, they have a mod to Minecraft, but the Minecraft has a script in there to capture what you're doing, right? So now you're remoting in using a RAS token to check on supply or something like that, right? And then we have to remember we have to identify wired and wireless network infrastructures. Again, you typically, when you go to your command and control, right, you leave your cell phones on the outside, right? You don't take those in with you, right? You have a lot of organizations today, hospitals and stuff. People use their phones on a regular basis, right? And they use it as part of their work, right? So we definitely have to identify what our wireless network infrastructure is, the risk to it, right? All the potential threats and vulnerabilities, right? Right? And this is, again, part of understanding those ports, right? Understanding what ports need to be open, what ones have to be closed, right? Making sure that you don't have everything just open, again. And then one of the biggest things I like to stress is understanding and knowing common networking, network hacking tools, right? In order for us to be able to successfully defend, we need to know what everybody else is using, right? We actually need to even play with those, right? We need to have our own little sandbox. We need to understand how they're working, what they do, and everything else, because if not, theory only goes so far, right? You can theorize all you want all day, but until you actually put it into practice, you don't know if it's actually going to work, right? And so, as part of the defense, we need to understand how these tools work, how they work within our one of the 7 domains that we talk about, right? Either user, LAN networking, LAN WAN or WAN or remote, right? How they use those tools to as a vector for some type of malware. And how they exploit, right? And how they're used as an attack. And then, of course, one of the big things that we all fell guilty of sometimes, right, is this social engineering practices, right? And how we just love to give up so much information and how we really need to kind of rein some of that stuff in and be cautious, right? Because none of us really, how do you think the employee of that cell phone company felt on the other end? Fine. What's that? Yeah, that's exactly it, right? They're annoyed by the crying baby, right? So, I mean, all those things are perfect, right? And if you get somebody, and all it takes is somebody who practices this type of stuff, and they'll get it instantly, right? Annoy the heck out of them, and then they'll get what they want, right? But that's why it's important for us to understand what these particular practices are, right? How even those in different positions that are not tech savvy at all could be susceptible to these types of issues, right? So with that, I think I'll open it up for a couple minutes of questions. After this, we'll finish it up. So I think that was it. Go back.
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Campbell with FCA, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to hand you the mic so you can ask our instructor. Also, if you would like your badge scanned for CEUs, I'll be right here behind the final row. Just stop by before you exit the area.
So you mentioned a couple of times about having ports, too many ports open. So if you move your firewall farther from the end users and include more of them within the single perimeter, and you have tens of thousands, if not 100,000 different applications, don't you necessarily have to have more ports open on that single firewall than you would on a number of smaller perimeters?
Let me see here. Can you repeat that? I have a little bit of hard hearing from.
So if you move your firewall into a bigger perimeter and have more users within that, don't you necessarily have to have more ports open because you have more different kinds of applications running through the same port or same firewall?
That's a good question. I think it'd be safe to say that that's one of those things that you definitely have to look at to see what necessarily needs to be open, right, port-wise. I think if you, let's see. I don't think you necessarily have to have more open, if that's your question. I think you need to be aware of what you're opening, right? And then if you can shut off any unused or unnecessary ports, in place of those, then to make sure you're doing that as well. Is that kind of what you were asking? Yeah.
Do you have any classes on hacking? Or you give classes on?
Yes, yeah. Our school does do pen testing, and we do the labs that I showed you at the beginning are established and set up for actually St. Leo University, and we actually participate in a number of different cyber competitions and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that we're starting to get more involved with.
One of your earlier slides with the St. Leo and especially with the online degree programs, you showed the virtual labs and some of the different VMs that you're using for that. When you're doing that kind of thing and you're needing to have both remote administration from the instructor standpoint as well as kind of repeatable processes for the student, what have you guys found as the best background infrastructure for that kind of thing? Are you using CloudShare VMs? Are you using AWS?
Good question. We're actually looking into a lot of that right now. My preference is I use GCP for some things. We are looking at AWS. So it really, we don't, it really becomes a demand thing, right? It becomes, especially when you're talking about security, and that's another aspect, right? Security, you have to understand what's going on in the cloud. What do you have running in the cloud? What type of systems you're using? Do you have a hybrid mix and stuff like that, right? And so I can't give you a specific, but maybe Dr. Mohammed can give you some more information.
So far, we have found that the cloud seems to satisfy the needs given the demand. And because you have some students who will work on the weekend, some want to do 9 o'clock in the morning, some want to do it midnight if they're overseas or they're deployed. So we found that the cloud so far is what works best for us. We are looking at AWS because it's giving us a very competitive pricing. So we are looking into it right now. But yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, look at that. Norris came up. One of the things I kind of would point out, social engineering wise, I attended a Hack Miami conference last year. And one of the interesting things that they talked about, what they did is, and we tend to forget about, is stuff that we throw away, right? And how they actually will, do dumpster diving, right? And how some people will actually, one organization will actually jump in after somebody. So they'll get in through the door and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of it. I hope you enjoyed the lesson here. Please remember to at least scan your badges on your way out. I hope it wasn't too painful. Thanks.
Like the glasses.